Welcome to Conversations with Garmamie. This is episode 17.
One of the most powerful ways to communicate environmental change and environmental issues is telling stories, what people have experienced on the ground, people that they can relate to.
Our guest is
Jennifer Pate. Film is an extremely powerful medium to engage people, and one of the best parts of film is being able to take people on a journey. You can literally walk them through what you did. And I don't know, I've watched certain films where I felt like I was right there in it with them.
She's a geographer and filmmaker fascinated by human-environment interaction. From Venezuela's Mount Roraima to a 1,000-kilometer road down the Zambezi River in Zambia, to sailing across the Atlantic Ocean as part of an all-female team conducting scientific research on plastics, toxics, and female health. Her research and sports expeditions have taken her across the globe, and she uses filmmaking to inform, engage, and celebrate people's stories of social and environmental responsibility.
It really has allowed me to share journeys that I've had and explain issues. You know, you have to be very careful of how you communicate things because they can get extremely overwhelming. With this last trip that I did, the expedition across the Atlantic, I told the story of 14 women crossing the ocean, number one. And within that, tied in the dialogue of plastics and toxics. And it was really the combination of all of those strands of story that ended up being so powerful. And I honestly could have done an hour-long documentary about each of the women on this trip because they were all so incredible. I mean, we had, our youngest was Malin, she's from Norway. She was Environmentalist of the Year when she was 18. Come on, in Norway.
Wow.
I mean, that's awesome.
Right.
And, and then you've got people like Constanza, who works for the European Environment Agency. And she's, a complete powerhouse. She's out there doing some incredible stuff. And then you've got Jenna Jambeck, who's down at the University of Georgia. And she was the first one to ever sort of quantify the amount of plastics that's making its way into our oceans. Wow. So you've got like these incredible women. Sure. I really wish I could have done, 14 documentaries, but
why don't you do like short?
I should. Yeah, if
to further promote the.
Yeah, I should absolutely. It's definitely something that's crossed my mind, and
or even a podcast series.
I should do a podcast series. Yes, after this, I'll know how to do it.
There you go.
Yeah. And it's not that it's not that I have a shortage of material either. So that is something that will be done hopefully in the winter. Summers are kind of crazy running the park, but I'd love to do that for sure.
What is a glocal?
Okay, so glocal is this idea that I've had. It's a lifestyle more than anything else that I believe a lot of people are leading, but they may not know it. So my general concept behind it is you're a global local. So someone who understands and opens themselves to global ideas and global challenges. A lot of the time I'm taking, sort of environmental issues as the main example of that. And instead of being sort of put off or scared, allowing yourself to be scared by how daunting some of our environmental challenges are, but also finding the optimism to act in the face of those challenges and to find other people around you to sort of create movements and create energy to sort of tackle these things. So that's kind of, it's a way of sort of defining how I choose to live my life, and it's a way of giving a framework. There's no set guidelines or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So at this point, it's really just an idea in my head. But I think it's a powerful sort of start to help define people who are open to these things, but, and they are working towards them. So
what's your story behind this? What started it?
Yeah. Okay. So basically I've been very fortunate in my life to travel the world quite extensively. My parents have been very supportive in from a very young age, taking me to different places and exposing me to the world. And we moved to England from Canada when I was 11, and I lived there for 15 years. I'm now 27. And it was really from there that I sort of traveled and experienced different places and became what I would like to call a global citizen. So someone who sort of exposes themselves to different cultures and understands that, we can't just have one view of the world. We really need to talk to as many people as possible from as many different places and try and define our world from a much larger lens. Mm-hmm. And I always, in terms of environmental challenges and things, I did my undergraduate in geography at the University College of London in England. And then I went on and did my Master's of Science in Environment, Science, and Society. And at the same time, I started doing expeditions. So I started basically traveling to remote areas and either conducting research or sort of raising awareness of environmental issues, mm-hmm. from logging to plastics in the ocean, and also, issues with tourism infrastructure. And I've been very fortunate to travel to some amazing countries doing that. And then I started making films about it just because I thought that was the best way to sort of share my vision or how I see the world. Mm-hmm. And film can be an extremely powerful medium for taking people on a journey with you.
Sure. Why did you decide to study geography? Why that as an undergrad? And from there, tell us about the transition, moving from where in Canada were you?
We were in London, Ontario.
So moving from London, Ontario to England. How was that transition at 11?
At 11, yeah. So, we moved there. Both my parents are academics. So they were both working at the University of Oxford. So I did high school in Oxford, England, and then I moved to the big city in London, mm-hmm. England, to do my undergrad and my postgrad, and then I worked there for several years as well. The transition of moving from Canada to England was hard at points. All my family is here in Canada, so mm-hmm. that was quite a big step to move over as our little small family unit and kind of be in a different country, but mm-hmm. it was honestly the best thing my parents could have ever done for me.
Why is that?
It really, it stretched me. It sort of, I always think, and I've said this about my expeditions as well, the most challenging parts of your expeditions, number one, make the best stories, but they also make you grow as a person. By stretching you, it shows you your limits of your comfort zone and it allows you to move past them. Mm-hmm. And everything's a lesson, right? You can take lessons from everything and everyone that you meet. Mm-hmm. And sort of moving to England and being in a different country, and really, although we speak the same language in English in a very broad sense of the term, it was a totally different experience. Like, our language was different, and then, changing to a different school system, mm-hmm. Was quite an experience. And it wasn't until sort of I'd say about 8 years into living there that I really sort of hit my stride. And it was really when I went to university and I chose to specialize in geography that I kind of found my happy place.
But why geography? Out of all the subjects, what attracted you to geography?
Definitely because I traveled so much. I was like, you know what? Geography seems to have everything. We always joked that it was the greedy discipline. So you could basically study anything with geography. And, okay. In just taking my undergrad, for example, I studied from, African diaspora all the way through to sort of geographical information systems. There was no sort of one thing. You could literally study whatever you wanted. So we did society and space, we did nature and culture, and you'd go from hard sciences all the way through to really technology, but also social science. So there was something for everyone, mm-hmm. and something for all parts of my brain. So I found it very stimulating. And then just the opportunity to travel. It's one of those degrees that really encourages students to go out, see the world, experience it firsthand, and apply that knowledge in the classroom or in your papers or in your research. So that was definitely just getting out there. I love to travel. So getting out there was one of the biggest things that attracted me to it.
Where have you been in the world? Where have your expeditions, where have they taken you?
Mm-hmm. So my first ever expedition, I actually led on the west coast of Vancouver Island. So it was funny because a lot of people joked that I was just coming home. Mm-hmm. But as we all know, Canada's huge and very diverse and very different. And I had never been to the west coast before. Mm-hmm. But I decided I wanted to do my undergraduate research. I wanted to go abroad. I wanted to do something out there. And so I actually took 2 of my colleagues from the University College of London, and we went out there and spent around a month basically working with local communities, including First Nations, looking at logging practices. And I actually was looking specifically at experiences of environmental subjects. So people who are living in places that have been designated by environmental management schemes on different levels. So out there, we were in Clayoquot Sound, which was actually the site of Canada's largest civil disobedience back in the 1990s, which is around logging. And I was there almost exactly a decade after it was designated a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. So I was actually looking at talking to local people about their experience of living in a biosphere reserve. And it was one of the best experiences in the fact that it taught me that you cannot really have hypotheses about what it's going to be like in the real world. You just have to get out there, and you have to be flexible when you're researching, because you get out there with one idea and it's something completely different. So I actually ended up rewriting my entire thesis when I got back.
Really?
Based on what I experienced while I was out there. Wow. So that kind of really, and it was also the first time in my life that I've really been outside of my comfort zone. There were a couple of run-ins with wildlife, like bears and humpback whales and things like that.
What happened? Tell the story. Bears?
Yeah, well, we were working out so I was partnering with some of my colleagues, and they were physical geographers rather than human geographers like myself. And we were looking at biodiversity in logging cuts, macroinvertebrates, but also flora as well. And just being out in remote logging cuts, we just had a couple of run-ins where we would hear crashing coming through the forest and not really know what it was. And then all of a sudden this bear came like flying out of the brush on one side and like went running across and then jumped into the brush on the other side. And it was, you know.
So it didn't bother you?
No, I don't think it even saw us. I think we were just really lucky because it just went crashing past us. And then we decided on the final week of our trip to go and do something that was a bit more physically challenging. So we actually traveled up to the northernmost aquatic point of Clayoquot Sound, which is very, very remote. And we camped up there for a week, and it was amazing. We knew that no one was around, that, you know, there wasn't civilization anywhere near us. But so one night we were camping, and we had just finished cooking dinner, and we heard this gunshot sound. And we were at the end of a 10-kilometer inlet, so it was reverberating up and down, like, and we were like, is someone hunting? Like, why would someone be out here? You know, we didn't expect anybody. So we decided to go out and check it out. And it was a humpback whale hunting. So it was jumping out of the water, slamming its body down, and then stunning the fish, and then eating them. Wow. And it came in every night for 5 nights while we were out there.
At the same time, or?
Pretty much the same time. Came with the tide.
Interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, that was definitely the first trip where I was kind of outside my comfort zone. There were definitely moments where I thought, I'm not ready to die yet. You know? But in such a great way, because I came home and I was like buzzing about the trip. I was like, this is what I want to do. I absolutely love it. And then that's kind of when I started basically doing an expedition pretty much every year. So I've been, the next one I did was a trip out to Venezuela. And we climbed Mount Roraima, which is a plateau mountain in the Guiana Highlands. And I went with a team of 10 other young people. And we were looking at, it was basically a conservation-focused expedition, looking at the fact that we've got these really amazing islands in the sky, as we call them, where they have completely unique micro and macro environments on top of these mountains, because they're basically cut off from one another. And we were looking at tourism infrastructure, because it's starting to become a really popular spot for hiking and climbing. And there's 150 of these mountains, but you can only actually climb 2 of them.
Okay.
So because of they're basically complete cliff faces, they're kilometer high.
Okay. Where in Venezuela is this? Is this in the
It's in the southern part of Venezuela. And Mount Roraima, which is the one that we climbed, it's actually a tri-border with Brazil, Guyana, and Venezuela.
Okay.
So there's also some political issues there in terms of, if you want to try and do some large-scale protection, you've got to have, you know, an international agreement at that point. So it was a really fascinating thing. The best thing to come out of that trip was it was my first ever exposure to film.
Really?
Yeah. So I'd always liked taking pictures when I was traveling, but I'd never thought, oh, you know, I really want to get into film. And so basically, got out there and was very fortunate to go as part of this expedition that had 2 BBC cameramen on it.
Wow.
And one of them, Adrian Warren, who was an amazing cameraman, and he was head of the natural history unit at the BBC and at IMAX, and he was about 62 when we went on that trip. And I remember sitting down with him and chatting before we even got there, and he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I really want to just travel, and it seems like I really want to do filming. And he was like, well, then just do it. And I was like, oh my goodness, okay, well, where do you even start? And so went on that trip, fell in love with it, came home, and that was that one. I really, for about 3 months afterwards, I think I drove everybody crazy because I couldn't stop talking about my trip. And that's a recurring thing when I come back from trips and, people haven't been there with you. It's so hard to explain what you actually experienced and kind of portray that to people. And that's why film is so powerful. But anyway, I came back from that and I thought, I want to make films. And so I started doing my master's, and at the same time I set up a film company called Your Frontier. And it was about sort of social environmental responsibility awareness raising. And I started it with one of the guys that I went to Venezuela with and a friend of his. And I think it's now 5 years old or something like that, which is kind of crazy. And one of the first ever documentaries that I made was actually about Adrian Warren. He passed away 8 months after we got back from cancer. And so I traveled around the UK and talked internationally to people that he'd worked with, and made a documentary about his life. And then from that point, I was like, yes, this is what I'm doing. So I gave it a really good go. Hard to find financing for it. Basically financed everything. We ended up going to Zambia and filming a world first rowing expedition down the Zambezi River.
Right.
And
how long was that? How long was that river?
They rowed 1,000 kilometers.
Okay.
Yeah, from the border with Angola right through to Victoria Falls.
How long did that take?
Were you
part of that?
So I was part of the support crew. I didn't actually get to go on the trip.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I paid for my cameraman to go because, as I said,
footage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, like, it was, at that point, I didn't have enough experience with the camera to really sort of say, okay, I'm going to be the one to go out and film it. And so I sent Alex out, and they filmed it, and it was just a spectacular documentary. It was just a great project. And it was raising money for Village Water, which is a local charity that works out in the Copperbelt region, basically putting in wells and educating about sanitation. So they raised, I think, about £20,000 for Village Water, and actually went and put in wells and all of that. So that was great. I love the idea of having something that I'm really passionate about and going out and making it happen. I also love being faced with an opportunity and just grabbing it and going with it, even if it's something that I wasn't sure was going to be a passion, and then it becomes a passion, because you can't make a documentary or get involved with a group and not be passionate about it. If you're surrounded by amazing people, you catch on to their energy, and you're like, no, this is really important and we need to raise awareness about it. Really, the trip to Zambia was one of those ones that came to us. We didn't actively search for it. It actually ended up being our first big project. And I just happened to have a friend who was a rower, and it was his dad who was leading it. And his family, that was kind of the impetus behind it. So that was our first ever big project. And so while they were off filming in Zambia, I was making the tribute documentary back in England about Adrian. And the great thing about the Adrian Warren documentary is I got to meet some really amazing people in the film industry. I was able to interview Sir David Attenborough at his home in London, England, and speak to him about his memories about Adrian. And I worked very closely with Adrian's partner. So I went through all of his backlog of footage from years of filming, and he had his own film company called Partridge Films. And I felt like I almost traveled the world going through his footage, because he'd been everywhere. But his big passion was Venezuela, and that's why we met. But so then after those came out, the Zambia document, the Row Zambezi and Adrian Warren film, we started getting involved with different charities in the UK and making short films for them, just awareness raising. So diversity of examples. One was I was still at the university in London, University College of London, and I met a girl who was
doing your master's.
Yes, I was doing my master's at the time, and I met a girl who was doing a PhD in neurology, and she had set up her own charity called Movement for Hope, and it was about people with neurological diseases and mixing science and art to raise awareness. So we ended up doing a project together called Paint Aware, and she would paint a portrait of this person, and then she would all abstract it with what their disease looked like down the microscope.
Wow.
So she and I worked on that together. We interviewed a lot of different people with, sort of MND-ALS, multiple sclerosis, and then we did a showing of that. And so that's an example of somewhere on the ground, just in England. I also worked with another organization called Thinking Development, and they were building a school in Haiti after the earthquake. So that was another great experience, just working with, I was actually on an all-female team, and they were working with a convent school, trying to rebuild.
The crew was an all-female, or the organization?
The organization was led by women,
Cool.
which was really, really cool. And they were awesome, and they just broken ground this year. So it was we were kind of doing their first ever promotional material. So that was really exciting.
This was right after the...
So this was back 2011, so a year afterwards. Yeah, a year afterwards. But they'd been out several times just doing research and talking to them and kind of getting enough information to bring it back and start raising funds. So I was part of the fundraising for that.
Did you go to?
I never got a chance to go, sadly, but I lived vicariously through them, and they got some amazing footage, so I would just utilize their footage and help them put it together.
Cool. So you were editing?
Yes, exactly. So I edited their promotional film for them. And then, there were other ones that kind of came to the fore. I started actually, because I was studying and then I was working, I started actually getting into sort of micro adventures because I wasn't able to go on these big trips that I really wanted to go on. So I started doing things like I did a stand-up paddleboard race, like a marathon down the Thames in London, which is 26 miles, and made a
You're
film.
nuts.
Yeah, and I'd actually only paddleboarded once before that.
Really?
Yeah, I just thought.
So you did it once, okay, and then you got it. You signed up for this race.
Yes, I did. Yeah. Okay. So we paddled 26 miles down the Thames and raised money for St. Mark's Hospital. So we were raising money. It was about bowel cancer and colon cancer, and made a short film about that. So I started getting into basically small projects on the ground in England, and then about once a year trying to do a bigger project. And that's kind of how it's gone up until the latest one, which was my sail across the Atlantic, and that one was probably we call it X Expedition.
Is that because it's all women?
It's all women. So the double X is for the double chromosome. Yeah.
Cool. So tell us about that. That's you guys sailed from across the Atlantic.
That's right. So we sailed from Lanzarote in the Canary Islands to Martinique in the Caribbean. And that was, we left on November 16th. 2014, and we arrived in Martinique on the 5th of December. So it took us 19 days to sail across. Yeah.
Wow, you guys, I would have thought that would have taken longer than that. But
yeah.
That's pretty fast, yeah?
That is pretty fast, yeah. So I had never sailed before. So that was something that I kind of, once again, went in just went in at the deep end and thought, why not?
How did you? Give us the context as to how this expedition. How did it come together? Where the opportunity?
Sure. So it kind of actually ties in with what I do now, which is I co-own and operate WindMill Lake Wake and Eco Park, just outside of Bayfield in Ontario, where we teach wakeboarding and stand-up paddleboarding. So I was still living in England at the time, and an opportunity came. My parents wanted to retire back to Canada, and I said, I don't think I'm going to come back. I've got my film company. I was working at the University of Oxford at the time, and I just thought, I've got a life here. All my friends are here. I've been here 15 years. Like, going back to Canada would be like going to a completely new country, it's home in inverted commas, but not really home. And my mom said, just come back for a week and help me look at properties. And I said, okay. So I came back with her. It was February, and we were looking around, and they wanted to move back. We had a cottage up in Bayfield when I was a kid, and all I could remember about Bayfield was ice cream, the beach, and elderly people. And I was like, why would I move back to Bayfield? What is going to be there for me? And so, yeah, I came back for a week with my mom looking at properties and things like that. And we looked along Lake Huron. And just coming from England, we really wanted character. And there just nothing seemed to really fit the bill. It was beautiful. But so anyway, our agent said, well, I've got one more place. And it's not on the lake, but it has a lake. And my mom and I kind of looked at each other and we were like, that sounds interesting. And so he brought us here to WindMill Lake. And I mean, you can see when you're here, it's so beautiful. We have 212 acres of forest and field. We've also got a 40-acre lake. And it's private and enclosed, and it's just truly awesome. So anyway, Mom and I fell in love with it. And he said, wow, there's one catch. My son has been planning to put a wakeboarding park here. So the only way I would sell it is if you would maybe allow him to do that. And so my mom looked at me and she goes, you could do that? And I said, I've never wakeboarded in my life. She was like, you like outdoor things, you could learn. Because she really wanted me to move home. Right. And I said, okay, fine, we'll meet with him for lunch. So the next day we met with Andy, who's my business partner. And he brought this amazing file folder full of ideas and information. And having done the stand-up paddleboard marathon, I thought, okay, well, I really like paddleboarding. And I kind of looked at this stuff, and with my background being environmental sustainability and management, I sort of said to him, he was kind of hitting all the buzzwords of, it was sustainable, and, all of our wakeboarding runs off electricity, and instead of boats, like no motorized boats. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is quite the opportunity. And I just looked at my mom, and she was just grinning ear to ear. And I said, all right, let's do it. And so that was a year before I moved back. So what was really funny is that basically met Andy, we decided to go forward. I went back to England, and around the same time, the opportunity to go on X Expedition presented itself. So a friend of mine sent it to me and said, you've got to sign up for this because, this is just something that you have to do. And I've always wanted to cross an ocean. I just thought this isn't going to be something I'm going to ever get to do in my lifetime. And so when I saw it, I was like, oh, I've got to sign up. So I actually did the application very soon after that, and found out that I got a place. And the amazing thing about X Expedition is not only just, at first I signed up because I wanted to cross an ocean. And I thought, this is awesome. All-female team, I get to go across, great. And then as I started to delve deeper into the issues that they were looking into, I was kind of shocked that I didn't know about all the plastic in the ocean. I, as someone who is quite environmentally conscious, and I pride myself on knowing enough about a diversity of issues, I thought to myself, this is shocking and actually extremely upsetting. And then
what are these issues? Tell us about
that. So basically, what we were looking at was plastics and toxics in the ocean. So we actually have quite let me have a think about how best to phrase it. We have quite a monumental problem right now with plastics in the ocean. I don't know if you've heard of the gyres. They're basically these 5 giant whirlpools of plastic and garbage in the oceans.
It's like as big as an island, or
even bigger. So and basically they travel with the tides and with the Coriolis effect. So they create these giant whirlpools and they collect garbage and plastic. So the thing about plastic is it never disappears. It only breaks down smaller and smaller. So instead of being something you can see, it becomes small enough that it's invisible to the naked eye. And so that's why for X Expedition, our tagline was making the unseen seen. And you know what?
I was going to ask him. Okay.
Yeah, and also that comes to the fore as well when we're talking about the relationship between plastics and toxics, because plastics actually operate as sponges for toxics in the water. So they actually absorb the toxics, and then they're ingested by fish and marine life, and then they make their way back to us through the food chain. So we're...
Quick question.
Sure.
What are these things? Is this floating in the Pacific? All oceans? Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got currently we definitely know about 5 gyres. So there's 2 in the Atlantic, 1 in the north, 1 in the south, 2 in the Pacific, north and south, and 1 in the Indian Ocean.
How big are they roughly? What's
So, for example, the one in the Indian Ocean stretches from Madagascar to Perth in Australia.
Really? The size of it?
Yeah, and they travel with the ocean currents.
Whoa.
So we're talking
From Madagascar to Australia.
yeah, so we're talking about very extensive spaces, and you can basically, we chose our route in the Atlantic to actually sail between the two gyres, because research has been and is being done in the gyres, but we wanted to raise awareness that this isn't just an issue there where it's swirling around, it's actually everywhere.
It's a global.
Oh, it's everywhere. It's global. Absolutely. Yeah. So
What are the challenges, before we get into some of the stories from, I'm sure there's stories from the expedition crossing the Atlantic. What are the challenges, generally speaking, in raising awareness on a particular environmental or social issue? What are the communication challenges that you've come across? What are they? I guess it depends, right, on what the cause is.
Absolutely.
But there's some commonalities.
yeah,
right?
absolutely. I mean, I've been involved in sort of environmental campaigning since I was about 16 years old, in very different forms. And the biggest thing that I have learned is that you need to allow people space to take what you have to give them information, and not scaremonger. You know, you have to be very careful to basically raise something in them that allows them, and this brings us back to this idea of being glocal, so opening yourself to these basically very daunting environmental issues, but still finding optimism. So you have to strike a balance where you are basically communicating enough information that you almost overwhelm them, but then you always need to bring it back to hope. And there really, really has to be a dialogue of optimism. That is the biggest thing that I've learned in the past couple of years, especially with this last one. And, you know, it's vital to not lecture. That is another thing that I've definitely learned. You know, basically giving information across, explaining things, giving it enough tangible evidence and showing it so that they can see it. You know, and there's nothing like seeing and feeling things to experience. And that's why we have such trouble with climate change, because unless you can see it, unless it's tangible, you can touch it, you can feel it, people won't necessarily believe it's there or want to believe it's there. But if it's facing you, if you can see it, you're going to understand it and you're going to want to do something about it. So one of the ladies who I crossed the ocean with, she said to me, you know, I never would have thought at this stage in my life that I would consider myself an environmentalist. And she said it took crossing the ocean and picking up buckets of water with plastic in them to understand that this truly is a big issue.
Wow.
Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges is always, how do you communicate without scaring someone to the point where they feel helpless? And we have such a strong dialogue of being helpless instead of powerful. You know, human beings are extremely powerful as consumers, and just we have a choice every day that to act, you know, and it really is about encouraging people, but giving them tangible steps. So saying, hey, why don't you just, and you know, plastics is a perfect example, is try and have a plastic-free day. And it actually is an extremely powerful awareness raising tool, because when you're actively thinking, okay, I can't use plastic today, you start to realize how much plastic there is out there and how much we rely on it. You don't see it otherwise. And this is why the Making the Unseen Seen tagline has been so powerful for me personally, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You know, whether it's, you know, you're seeing pictures of plastic and you can see physical impacts on wildlife. For example, I'm sure you've seen pictures of animals with, you know, the plastic tops from Coke cans and stuff, right, around necks and things like that. And then
I saw a clip this morning on Facebook, something with it was a whale, and it was underwater, obviously, and there were these divers who were cutting off some sort of I guess it was plastic that was wrapped around it, and when they removed the plastic, there was clearly this thing was irritating the whale's skin, you know, because you could see the marks, and they were rather There's discoloration.
Yeah, and I mean, there's the sort of explicit, obvious impacts that you can see. So things like that, for example. Then you've got, whales and animals washing up on beaches that have died because their digestive tracts are full of plastic. So I don't know if you've heard of Midway Atoll in the Pacific. There was a great documentary called Midway made about this basically series of islands and the albatross that live out there. And there's a really evocative picture of a carcass of an albatross. And as the body has started to degrade, it's just left with its stomach, which was full of plastic. And it can't digest, and it basically starves to death.
Wow.
And this is happening more and more throughout the world. It's not just out in the oceans. It's right here in our backyard in the Great Lakes. It's everywhere. And then it goes even farther than that into the ones that you can't see. And that's the really small pieces and the toxics. And this is the next stage. Like, we're starting to really raise awareness, and I feel like people are becoming more and more aware of the fact that there are plastics out there. But what the next part of the dialogue and the story is our relationship with toxics as well. So the fact that not only are we ingesting plastic, we're also ingesting the toxics that are absorbed by that plastic. And the story of endocrine disrupting chemicals, for example, started here in the Great Lakes in terms of evidence of fish mutations, reproductive development. And, the World Health Organization has started to state that we know by looking at the environment and what's happening to wildlife that this can't not be affecting human beings as well. So it's a pretty scary story to engage with, but it is also the first time in my career as an environmentalist, or however you want to describe me.
How do you describe yourself?
I mean, I'm happy to be called an environmentalist. I think it's a powerful thing to be. I'm also just a person. I happen to really, really care about where we live. We've got one planet. That's it. For now, until I actually watched Interstellar last night, so it's very on point. But we all share a common home, and I personally call myself a global citizen. I'm a glocal. I care about the planet that I live on, and I'm willing to stand up and fight for it. I think unfortunately, there's a lot of negative connotation to the word environmentalist.
There's a lot of stigmas, right?
Yeah, and it depends, because it's all about delivery, but I'm proud to be called an environmentalist, and I allow people to define me however they want to, but I'm just another person who cares about the environment, and I care about the people in it and all the beings in it.
Eventually, would you ever consider becoming a politician, to further the environmental agenda?
I mean, people have definitely asked me this question before, and it's not, and people have suggested that my next natural step would be go into politics, but it's not something that I would ever do. And the reason for that is I truly believe that my path is to continue doing what I'm doing, doing it from the ground up. For a lot of people, and we had Maud Barlow here in Bayfield not long ago. She's the chairperson of the Council of Canadians, and she is an absolutely spectacular person. Really powerful human being, powerful glocal, and she and I presented together about water health and water quality issues. Because I'm a patron for Blue Community Bayfield, which we can go into as well, which is a really awesome initiative. And we're actually the only location that's adopted this initiative from the Council of Canadians from the ground up, as a community, as a collective, rather than as a municipality, which is a really powerful dialogue, to come from the people rather than from your elected officials. And I think one of the biggest things that I learned from Maud was, she said, we need to stop giving up on politics as a channel for change. And I think that happens so often when
Giving up?
Yeah, I think there's a real sort of so I'll give you the context for how she said it. I organized an all-female meeting with women from across my community when she was here. So people from business, people from they were legal backgrounds, so different cross sections, moms,
Sure.
you know, any women from across the community. And we basically posed the question, you know, we've got plastics in the Great Lakes. Number one, you know, how do you feel about it? What scares you about it? How do you choose to engage with it? And what do you think the solutions are? And pretty much 90% said, we need to change our behavior. It's on us. There was basically no mention of, we need to pressure government. We need to, you know, do things like that. And she said, you know, we need to stop taking all the onus on ourselves. It's a very important thing. We do need behavior change, 100%. But we also need to stand up and say to our government, you need to change. You need to put in bans on microbeads, which we now know, you know, theoretically the Harper government is putting in a ban on microbeads. It's part of their election campaign, which is great. And, you know,
educate us on microbeads.
Right. So another version of microplastics. So these small version of the smaller pieces of plastic are actually microbeads. So they're actually created and put in cosmetic products like exfoliators, toothpaste, and they're basically tiny little balls of plastic.
Wow.
And they're in so many products. Actually, I think there's 1,000 products in the U.S. alone that have microbeads in them. And they basically, you scrub them on your face and you brush them into your teeth and your gums, and then they wash down the drain and they make their way out into the lakes and into the ocean. So they are another sponge for toxics, and they are being ingested by, you know, wildlife, and they are making their way back to us through the food chain. I mean, there was an expedition led by Five Gyres Institute in the Great Lakes in 2013, and they found on average 40,000 pieces of microplastic per kilometer squared in our Great Lakes, and that includes microbeads. So that's why I'm going on to do what I'm doing next summer, which is Expedition Great Lakes, because it's not just out in the oceans. It's right here. It's in our backyard, and we have the power to change it. You know, we really do. At this point, as I said, like, this is the first time in my environmental career, I guess, that I've felt true optimism and hope that we can change the story. And it has to come from us as people to decide we want to protect the health of our backyard.
What motivates you personally? I think you might have touched on it earlier, but if you can elaborate, well, what motivates you personally to pursue raising awareness on these issues? Why are they important to you?
It's a great question.
I know it sounds obvious, but
no. Actually, I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. I wake up every morning and I feel fortunate to be here, you know, in this place that I live. I live in an incredible part of the world, and I've had the chance to travel to very different parts of the world. And everywhere you go, our planet's amazing. It really is. Like, we are so fortunate to just be alive and have this incredible home. And we have not only the responsibility, but we have, what's the best word for it? We have the honor of protecting this planet. And that, I think that's what really, you know, pushes me forward to do this is, you know, we need to make people understand that we're not just here to be here, and we don't have ownership over the planet. We have to care for it. And I think it frustrates me sometimes when I'm talking to people and their priority is, the environment isn't one of their priorities. And I understand it, because people, you know, life gets crazy, it gets busy, and it falls down the line. But there are so many things that we can do in our everyday life. You don't have to be an environmentalist. You can just be a person who cares about your planet. And I think the more that I talk to people people do care, but they just need other people around them to have the conversation, to support each other, to find other people who are interested in whatever they're interested in. I mean, there's a diversity of environmental issues that you can, and social issues that you can get involved with. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest things that I try to do is encourage people to find like-minded people. They're around. Sometimes you have to hunt harder than other times, but I try to encourage people to, if you're passionate about something, be the change, you know? If you can't find people in your community, start something. Because if you send out something and you say out into the ether and you just say, I really care about this, I can guarantee you're going to get people come back to you and say, I also care about that. Why don't we try to do something together? I think there's power in the collective. And really, I think for me, what's been the biggest thing about moving to Bayfield has been the local community. It was completely unexpected. I moved here not knowing what I would find, and I have found nothing but an absolutely incredible community of glocals, because the people who live here, they not only engage in these issues, they open themselves to them, but they are so proactive, and they're not scared. You know, they just say, we've got this issue, let's fix it. And we've held several events here in the community that have been packed. People care, and they want to do something, they want to help. And for me, that makes me wake up every morning and think, yes, if I've got other people who are willing to engage in what I'm saying and believe in what I'm doing, it's all worth it. And that propels me forward, for sure.
Tell us about sailing across the Atlantic Ocean as part of Expedition, your documentary film.
Having never sailed before, I didn't really know what to expect. I knew that I was going to have a lot of learning to do. You know, no matter what our roles were on the boat, we were all active crew. So we sailed 24/7 for 19 days. We had 3 watch teams.
And did some of them have sailing experience?
Yes. So I'd say probably about half had extensive sailing experience. Only a few had sailed an ocean. Quite a few of them, like Elaine, for example, she had sailed the Great Lakes quite a lot, but she'd never sailed an ocean. And then there were a few of us who had never sailed at all, and then some who had sort of, just sailed a couple of times. So it was a really nice sort of mixture of people. And we had really bad storms for the first 5 days, just squalls all the time, really, really big waves. And it was a great equalizer, because no matter how much sailing experience you had, everybody pretty much got seasick. But it was, I was never scared. But I definitely was like, this is legitimate. Like we're out sailing an ocean. And, we had one of those moments when we got about halfway, I thought, this is probably the most remote I'm ever going to be in my life, physically, unless I, go to a pole or something, which is, not off my my bucket list. But don't tell my mom. But yeah, in terms of being out in the environment and really experiencing the planet, being out in the middle of the ocean was a very powerful moment for me, for sure. But in terms of crossing, I mean, I've been on several expeditions, some mixed, some where it was just me and males. And this was my first ever all-female.
How was that?
Amazing. It was absolutely incredible. I really didn't have a distinct expectation. I kind of went in and was like, what will be, which is how I try and kind of approach most of them. Because with expeditions, you have to be flexible. You have to have plans. And you have to have done your risk assessment, and you need to have all your logistics in place, but you always have to afford flexibility, because things change in the blink of an eye. But anyway, we had a lot of sort of questions before we went out there. What's it going to be like all female? Is it going to be catty? All of the stereotypes that people expect. And whenever people sort of talk to us about it, when people ask that question, I was kind of like, I don't know. It seems a bit, I don't know. I hadn't really thought of it. Got out there.
It's funny. Would they ask that if it was all males? Would they be asking?
Exactly. They wouldn't.
No.
Let's be
Of course
honest.
not.
But it was excellent. We, there was never competition. There was never really any tension either. It was really one of the smoothest trips I've ever been on. There, everybody, there was just this real duty of care for one another.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter how awful you felt, you always turned to the person next to you and said, "How you doing? Can I get you anything?" Mm-hmm. Everybody was just really on the lookout for one another. Mm-hmm. And I mean, being on the boat 24/7, we had life jackets on the whole time, and we had basically tethers to tether ourselves to guy lines so that we wouldn't fall overboard.
Sure. Did that happen? Did anyone fall over?
Nope, no one fell overboard,
Okay.
Which was great. Mm-hmm. That's always good. But we did watches through the night. And you'd get bad weather, and you'd be in rainstorms, and you'd be miserable, and you kind of think, "Oh, why am I doing this?" And then someone would come up and be like, "Cup of tea," and you just kind of, everybody just really, I know it's a very British saying, but mucked together. We all just kind of got on with it, and we were kind of really, for the first few days, we were just sailing, and we really came down to the simplicity of, you just had to move forward that day. All we had to do was eat, sleep, and sail. Yeah. And then as we started to feel better and we started in with the science, so we did about 4 hours of science every day. We did bucket samples, and then we would sieve them for plastics. And then we also did a manta trawl. So it's hard to explain, and it's in the film, but it's basically a large metal... looks kind of like a manta ray almost, and it has a net in behind it that collects plastics and whatever debris we would get from the ocean. And then we would sieve it for different sizes of whatever we would find, and we found a mixture of biological materials, so biota, like little skeeters, and we had a couple of jellyfish and stuff like that, and then plastics. And in our first trawl, we actually found we had 1 piece of plastic to every 10 biota, which is kind of ridiculous if you think about it. It's a lot of plastic. So, and we found plastic right the way across as we sailed. So, yeah.
What do your friends and family think about your cool adventures?
I hope that they think that they're cool.
Well, why wouldn't they?
I think sometimes yeah, absolutely. So I think I drive my mom crazy. I think she worries.
Well,
she worries a lot.
You have to drive them crazy.
Yeah, right? Thanks, Mom. No, she's. I mean, my parents are amazing. They've always been extremely supportive of all my crazy adventures. I think whenever I have an idea, the first reaction is, "You what? You want a what? Pardon?" And then there's the process of working through, okay, Jen, are you sure that's possible? And I'm like, yeah, we can do it. Like, that's awesome. And there's usually sort of like a little negotiating process. But in general, I'm so fortunate to be surrounded by the people that I'm surrounded by. They've always encouraged me to follow my dreams. And it's backed up by hard work and dedication, and my friends are awesome. I'm sure everyone gets tired of hearing about stories of my travels after a while, but everybody's really, especially with this latest one, and the whole sort of microplastics and toxics issue. I've seen a real engagement from my friends and family to really proactively change their behavior, decreasing or eliminating their plastic use, and really educating themselves on alternatives. And what's really wonderful is I'll be like hanging out with friends, and they'll be talking to someone new, and I'll hear them say, "Have you heard about this?" And they'll start talking about microplastics without me even engaging and whenever I hear someone else mention it and they're talking about it, "Well, have you heard about microbeads and exfoliators?" That gives me this like electric buzz in my like heart and my being to keep doing what I'm doing.
So, Jennifer, where can people find you online and learn more about your projects and films?
So you can find me at www.jenniferpate.com. And it's actually been kind of useful. I've basically updated it with my past projects and also kind of things that I'm dreaming about, things that I'm already doing or I'm actively involved in. So you can kind of cruise there and see some of my pictures and some videos and stuff. Also, I've got a website for my film company, Your Frontier. So it's your-frontier.com. Where you can see some of my films. I really need to update it. And then also you can find me on Twitter at Jen Ann Pate. So when I moved back to Canada, I set up an outdoor recreation park with my business partner, Andy Oak. And we are basically a very unique outdoor park in that we are completely environmentally sustainable. We have cable wakeboarding. So instead of wakeboarding behind a boat, we actually are behind a cable system run off electricity. So it's completely silent. There's no fuel. We actually, the other day, we were watching someone wakeboard and they had birds flying beside them as they were wakeboarding. I mean, that's a pretty cool thing to see.
Were they real birds?
Oh, yeah, they were real birds. Yeah, and then we also do stand-up paddleboarding, canoeing, and kayaking. And we have no motorized transport. So it's a really great place for people to learn things for the first time. Our lake is enclosed. It's 40 acres, but you can see the shoreline at all times. And, you know, we're usually out there with them. Find out more about WindMill Lake at www.windmill-lake.ca.
Thank you very much for your time, and looking forward to more of your films and more, seeing what you're up to next, probably going to the moon or something.
Oh, thank you very much. No, next year is Expedition Great Lakes, so I'll be looking at microplastics in the Great Lakes.
All the best.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Conversations with Garmamie. For more information, visit garmamie.com. That's Garmamie.com. Garmamie.com.